Hello, everyone. This is Linda from CFS Self-Directed Supports. I'm recording this session today to talk to you and provide some educational information on the OPWDD ISS housing subsidy, specifically as it relates in the self-direction budget. I'm going to be reviewing some documents here that will be shared with you if you are participating in this program or interested in participating in this program. But wanted to review it with you in a video form as well to explain some of the nuances and just to provide a little bit more information than what's in the document. So New York State provides a subsidy, often referred to as ISS or Individual Support Services or OPWDD Housing Assistance Subsidy. So those terms are interchangeable. This subsidy is funded with 100% state dollars. It's not Medicaid funded, and it is designated to support income eligible individuals who would like to live independently, who are or will be financially and legally responsible for their housing unit as an owner or as a responsible tenant. This subsidy provides assistance with housing costs so that the individual can afford a housing in private market unit or in the broader community. Individuals can choose to live alone or with a roommate or a live-in caregiver. Information on that can be found in another session. And individuals are expected to contribute up to 30% of their countable income towards the housing costs. And there's a calculation methodology for this that I will review some examples of. And in shared living situations, that amount is prorated based on the roommate share. Okay. Also, OPWDD has a maximum subsidy amount that's based on state standards, which I will review with you. Okay, so to be eligible for a housing subsidy, an individual must be 18 years of age or older, have appropriate support services and safeguards to meet his or her needs in the community, will have applied for all applicable benefits, so SSI benefits for income, our housing choice voucher program, food stamps, different benefits that are available. For more information on the type of benefits that a person might be eligible for, there is a link that I've included here, mybenefits.ny.gov, that you can include your specific information to see what benefits you might be eligible for. Okay, the individual also must have housing that meets a quality standard, so safe and secure housing, have tenancy rights, meaning that a person has an enforceable lease and that they're financially responsible for the housing unit in the same way as any tenant rights would have rights to. Okay, it must be legally eligible to be occupied. It has to be a home that meets legal standards, and I'll give some examples in a little bit. Or the individual's name must be on the deed if there is home ownership. Okay, so that brings us to the type of housing that is acceptable. Now, because housing varies across different regions and across the state, this is something that you should work with your broker, your care manager, or us as the FI to ensure that the housing that you're pursuing meets the criteria. But essentially, individuals can look at single-family home, a townhome, a condominium, apartment, co-op, that any housing that is otherwise available to rent, own, or occupy under a legally enforceable agreement. And it must, again, as I mentioned before, meet quality standards. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It must be specific separate unit with a kitchen and bathroom facilities, and must meet local and state standards as a legal dwelling. So, for example, there are some homes that have been converted, a basement has been converted. If that's the case, it has to be legally able to be a separate dwelling from the main home. And we will ask for some documentation for that. Straight room rentals would not qualify. An individual can have a parent as a roommate. So for example, if a parent and the individual are renting an apartment and both the parent and individual are on that lease agreement, then the parent can be the roommate. Okay, there's some other examples such as mother-daughter. That's a common term I've heard, where it would be like a two-family home. Again, that as long as that second dwelling is legally able to be occupied and is separate, that would be acceptable. So again, these unique scenarios should be discussed with the team to make sure that they meet the criteria. Okay. In addition, there are options for affordable housing units. You know, of course, housing is expensive, especially here in the city and Long Island area. And so please take a look at some of the links on our agreement form where you can locate resources on affordable housing, especially here in the city. New York City Housing Connect has it's a great page where you can sign up to be on the different lists for affordable housing units as they're being developed. Okay. All individuals enrolled should have a care manager, and again, supporting people who are living independently might mean that the care manager would be more involved, and their role would be also to make sure that they're outreaching for various services or service providers, that they're implementing the life plan with safeguards that are specific to living alone, that they're helping with access to resources such as food stamps and HEAP, and keeping those benefits active. So the care manager is an integral part of the team for somebody who is living independently. Okay. Another requirement is the development of a housing subsidy plan. So OPWDD requires that for a person that is seeking the subsidy, that they have to have certain needs met and addressed. So the first part of the plan will include a justification for the subsidy and address the individual's needs in many of the following areas: rent, utilities. So for example, you know, is the person paying their portion of the rent on their own? Is their rent payee doing that? Who's responsible to pay the bills and to keep track that bills are being paid on time? Is there a need for rental insurance? Is there enough income for food, clothing? Does the person have adequate savings? And any other supports for independent living. So that justification is going to indicate why the person is seeking the subsidy, and the plan is indicating what are the actions necessary, or what are the safeguards needed to ensure that the person's needs are being met so that they can live alone in a safe manner. Okay, initial startup costs can be requested as a one-time expenditure, and these funds are limited. So the plan would need to also indicate how startup costs will be spent and how other needs will need to be met. So for example, if a person is receiving $3,000 startup costs, and a portion of that money is going towards a broker's fee, and that might only leave them with, let's say, $1,500 to furnish the apartment. Is that adequate? And if it's not adequate, are there other resources? So maybe the person's family is going to give them some items, or maybe they're going to bring some items from their family's home where they used to live, such as a bed and bedroom furniture. Who's helping them to use those startup funds to get the best deals possible, to stretch that money as far as possible. So, you know, that kind of detailed, individualized information will be discussed in this housing subsidy plan. Okay, and I'll show you some examples, and at the bottom of this agreement document, is where you can indicate that justification and the plan. It doesn't have to be on a separate page. Okay, so in order to calculate the eligible housing subsidy amount, the broker is going to work on completing the budget template. And that template requires that a number of data points to be included, such as how many people are living in the home, how many bedrooms. We have to include all sources of income. What is the actual rent or mortgage amount? And if utilities are not included, the amount of utilities and renters insurance, if applicable, okay? So that information has to be provided, and the broker, who is the one filling out the budget template, should verify this information to ensure accuracy. Some of this information we also will be verifying by requesting documents such as the lease and proof of income, so it needs to match. Okay. The budget template tab has formulas built in to calculate the housing subsidy that can be requested. So, as I mentioned before, the maximum subsidy is based on Home and Community Renewal, or HCR, payment standards. So that's the state agency that oversees Section 8. So they utilize the same calculations or the same maximum that is utilized for Section 8 affordable housing. A person can request, like let's say a person finds a 2-bedroom apartment that's within the range that they can afford, but there's only one person living there. The payment standard will be determined based on the one person living there, not the 2-bedroom apartment. So that the budget template will factor all of these things in automatically once the information is plugged in. Okay. An individual can rent housing above the payment standards, but it's important to note that the difference of the amount above the payment standards will need to be funded by the individual or their natural supports. So, that's something that when making these plans, that should be taken into consideration. Okay. Another note is for the payment standards, which I'm going to review shortly, have not increased in many years. So oftentimes landlords will do a rent increase every time a new lease is signed, and it's important for the individual and their support team to know about how much that increase will be, and is it something that the individual can afford and save for. Okay. Again, individuals are expected to contribute up to 30% of their countable net income towards housing expense. So net is after taxes, which is good. Okay, so the budget template will calculate the individual's contribution. So that the amount that the person has to contribute out of their own towards their rent is based on their net income. Okay, and countable, countable income means that's what is calculated after deductions take place. So the budget template has a standard deduction of $200 per month for personal allowance, and there might be other approved deductions that a person can indicate. So let's say there's out-of-pocket medical expenses that the person has. So let's say there's $50 a month of out-of-pocket copay for a supplemental insurance plan. That could be a deduction that could be indicated. So that would again reduce the person's countable net income. Okay. Individuals must provide and keep up to date all sources of income, including unearned and earned income. So unearned income would include SSI or Social Security disability benefits, and earned income would include wages from working. And proof of income must be submitted with the initial budget and then annually thereafter, or if a significant change has occurred. So some examples of significant changes could be person starting a new job or beginning to receive Social Security benefits that are at a higher rate, or a loss of a job. Okay. If a person has some income variation, such as seasonal employment, what we'd look for would be a pay stub and then a letter that indicates the average monthly income, so that, because we are looking for monthly amount. So if a person has a certain amount of money that they make per year, you'd want to average that out across the 12 months in the year. Okay, so this is the, as of, the day I wrote this, November 12th, this is the maximum household housing subsidy amount for the OPWDD subsidy based on bedroom size. So a 1-bedroom or studio, the max subsidy amount is $1,324, and then so forth. Okay, and once you get 4 bedrooms and plus, it stays at the $2,038. So let me go over some examples. Okay, so first I wanted to, I mentioned about the justification and the housing plan. This is what we're looking for, because this gets submitted to OPWDD. So we're looking for a justification statement, which would be why the person needs a housing subsidy. So in this example of Casey Test Girl, I'm indicating that it is her dream to live on her own. She currently lives with her parents, has a part-time job at Costco, and utilizes self-hired ComHab to assist her with developing her skills for independent living. She's located in an apartment near where her parents live. However, she's unable to afford the rent with her current income. There's the justification piece right there. The subsidy would enable her to afford to live independently in a home of her choice. Casey's apartment is a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn, and the rent is affordable for the area. However, it is above payment standards. So Casey's parents agreed to pay the additional rent above payment standards. So this justification is explaining to the person that's reading this from the state the reason why a subsidy is needed, and that it's covering, all bases. Now, the second part of this is the plan. So what is the plan to help Casey to live alone? And you're going to address some of those areas I mentioned before. So Casey's parents are her rent payee. They receive her SSI benefits. They agree to pay a portion of the rent and utilities, and Casey will work with her staff to budget her wages and food stamps for food, clothing, and all necessities. And she's also working on a goal to improve her budgeting skills. Casey's life plan and staff action plan will also detail the safeguards needed for independent living. I put this in here because, again, if it's in that document, it doesn't have to be repeated, but that life plan should talk about, evacuation plan, emergency preparedness plan, maintenance of the apartment, and all those things that Casey's going to need to ensure health and safety. Okay, and then I've indicated that her parents live nearby. They will communicate with her regularly to ensure health and safety. And she has staff 4 hours each day, 6 days a week, and on Sundays she spends with her family and attends church. In addition, Casey has an Apple Watch, which she wears, and has learned to use this if she needs to call for help. And the watch she wears while she's sleeping, and it has an app that will notify her parents if she falls. So it's a very brief picture of Casey Test Girl, but it demonstrates the supports that she has in place, the staffing supports and the natural supports, the plan for the overnight assistance, and also the plan to address, her funds, and how is she going to, pay for her rent, and who is helping her in those areas. Okay, so this doesn't have to be an exhaustive plan, but is it also a good opportunity for the team to get together and to make sure that the person's needs are really addressed prior to them moving. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a sample budget calculation. Again, this information is going to be on the budget template that the broker is going to complete. So in Casey's example, it's a 1-bedroom apartment that's $1,500 in rent. Okay, and she's living alone. So again, as an example, her SSI is $500. Her wages are $600. And as I mentioned, the template allows for a personal allowance deduction of $200. which brings her countable income to $900, okay? So just to back that up a little bit, so the 500 plus the 600 is 1100. If we deduct the 200, that brings us to the 900, okay? So the importance of that 900 is that's the amount that is going to dictate Casey's contribution of her income towards the rent. So 30% of the 900 totals $270. So this would tell you that Casey has to contribute out of her income, out of that $1,100, she has to contribute $270 to the rent. And if you remember, I mentioned up here that Casey's parents are her representative payee, and they will pay the portion of the rent, meaning they will take this out of her $500 SSI benefits that the parents receive, they're going to pay the $270 towards Casey's rent. Okay? The second area on the right is what is the subsidy and how does the subsidy get calculated? So remember that the maximum subsidy for a one-bedroom apartment is $1,354, and that brings us back to that grid that I showed you earlier. One-bedroom apartment, $1,324. So that's for the one bedroom. Now, as I mentioned, in Casey's situation, as the example, her rent is $1,500. That might very well be in Brooklyn a good rent for a one-bedroom apartment, okay? So if the rent is now, we already see the rent is above the payment standards, okay? So the subsidy gets calculated at $1,054 because the most OPWDD will consider contributing is $1,354, and Casey has to contribute the $270. So that's where we get the calculation of $1,054 for the subsidy for Casey Test Girl. So what that leaves us with is $176 that's not funded. So that's why, if you remember, I indicated in the plan that Casey's parents will pay the additional rent above payment standards. So in this example that I am showing you, I included an amount of rent that was above the payment standards so that you could see that the way the state calculates that is they will give the subsidy, but it will not exceed that threshold of the $1,354 minus the person's contribution. So the person has to make an informed decision if they have the resources to afford this $176 extra. If not, then don't get into the apartment that's going to cost $1,500, okay? So these are the informed decisions that people have to make based upon what's, what housing is available, how much the subsidy will cost, and what their income and resources are. I have a few other examples on this sheet that I'll leave for you. One is this example would be a two-bedroom apartment. So this, let's say it's a roommate. Let's say the roommate is the parent. So a parent and an individual are renting an apartment. And the apartment is $1,650. Now remember that maximum subsidy amount for the two-bedroom is $1,473. So the two-person calculation is going to prorate to half of the individual's share of the rent and the other half of the roommate's share, meaning that if the rent is $1,650, $825 is covered by the roommate and $825 has to be covered by the person. So the budget calculates again based on the income. It varies. So in this example, the income is $900. So my point is everybody's situation is going to be different. There's no set amount that a person is going to get for the subsidy. It depends on the person's income and deductions, and it depends on the amount of rent. So that's the point I want to make here, that you need to work with your broker and be sure to put in all of the calculations and see what that amount will be, before you sign a lease, so that you can be certain that you have the appropriate resources to afford the housing. Okay, so let me move on. The next thing is home safety. So the individual will need to ensure that the home is safe and reasonably well maintained. The individual, their care manager, and their FI representative, which can include the broker, the self-hired staff, or an FI staff. Any one of these parties can complete a quality assurance checklist, and that needs to be done when they first move in, the person first moves in, or annually thereafter. Okay, and if that assessment shows that the person cannot ensure quality standards, then the team will need to work on alternative living arrangements. Okay, so let me just show you that checklist. So this is the checklist. Again, it indicates who can complete it, and it has 12 areas that you're looking at. During this COVID state of emergency, this checklist can be completed virtually, like through FaceTime, as long as an in-person one can be done within 6 months. So the person should be ideally, if safe, the person will be in person doing this assessment, and they'll be looking at smoke detectors, do they work, an evacuation plan. So again, a very good resource that you can Google nyc.gov My Emergency Plan, and this is a very good document to use when a person is living on their own, to make sure that you have, for example, a to-go bag, or numbers on the fridge, emergency contact numbers, or if a person is utilizing a wheelchair, do they have an evacuation chair in case the elevator isn't working, or does the fire department know that they're there? So everybody's plan is going to be slightly unique and personalized, but having a document like the nyc.gov My Emergency Plan can give some guidance on what areas to address. Okay, so you're looking at the phone. Is it reasonably clean and well maintained? Is it free from hazardous conditions? So some examples might be, are items blocking means of egress? Are there exposed wires? Are there trip hazards? Is there a terrible roach problem could be health and safety related? Are there adequate furnishings? Is the heat, water, electricity, and AC working in working order? All of these things need to be looked at. And then if the answer is no to any of these areas, then the reviewer is going to indicate that they've discussed the problem and it's not a significant threat. Or if it is, what's the plan to address it? So, for example, let's say the smoke detector is not working. Well, I might check B, because to me that's a problem, and create a plan and have maybe the individual and their staff go and get some batteries to fix it, or to purchase a new device and follow up to make sure it's happened. Okay, or C, if there's some serious issues, then there needs to be alternative living arrangements must be developed with the team. So this document will be completed, will be signed off by the person, their advocate, the reviewer is the person completing this, and submitted to the FI. And we forward this to OPWDD. Okay. Okay, as we're getting close here, so the following documents need to be submitted to us as the FI, and then we forward some of them to the DDRO, the OPWDD staff. So the first initial, so let's say you are looking at starting, you're looking into housing. So you're going to submit that budget template that with all the housing subsidy calculations completed by the broker. You're going to submit proof of income that matches. So if it's a pay stub, if it's an award letter, current proof of income. If you've listed deductions such as health insurance or utilities or renter's insurance, then we need proof of that as well. This particular form is the OPWDD Housing Subsidy Agreement that you'll have to sign and complete and submit. And on this particular form, just to save paper, below I'll show you can include the housing subsidy plan, which includes that justification. And if housing is already identified, meaning if an apartment is already rented, we are going to want to see a valid lease agreement along with that QA checklist and vendor information for the landlord, which would be a W-9 if we're paying that landlord directly. Okay, and then ongoing, so annually, or if there's been a significant change, we want to see that proof of income. And that proof of income, that income should match what's on the budget. So if it has changed, we would probably want to also see a budget amendment to update the income on the budget template. Annually, we want to see a lease agreement, or however, whatever the frequency of that document is. So some people have a no end date on their lease agreement, so we wouldn't need to see that, but or 2 years lease agreement, so we'd want to see that every 2 years. So we need to see that we have to have a current lease agreement at all times. Proof of deductions, as mentioned, that QA checklist has to be done annually. This form has to be completed annually and reviewed and completed. And then the life plan, which would include key elements of that ISS plan. So areas such as the health and safety and goals to address outcomes and safeguards. Okay, and then of course we have everybody sign off. And as I mentioned, to conserve paper, this can be attached, but it's also here attached to this agreement form, so this justification statement and the housing subsidy plan. So again, initially this might be a little bit more lengthy as the person is planning, but then on an annual basis, you want to maybe just update those areas that have changed. Okay, so in closing, I reviewed this housing subsidy agreement form, participation agreement. We've at CFS, we've tailored this a little bit to what the state required to add some information, and you'll notice in parentheses are exactly as the state has indicated. We also have included what documents are needed and an area to put the justification and the housing subsidy plan. As a separate document, we have this housing subsidy quality checklist that has to be completed initially and then annually thereafter. And I have some samples of what the justification and the housing subsidy plan need to look like, and some sample budget calculations to help you guys while you're working with your broker on understanding what the person's contribution is and the subsidy amount will be. Okay, I want to thank our CFS Advisory Committee for helping to put this together. And if you have any questions, myself, Jennifer, Faye, we're always here to help. Thank you so much.